Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking the incredibly complex, highly charged, and frankly, absolutely fascinating Senate hearing regarding the intelligence community's investigation into the origins of COVID-19. Whether you followed the pandemic's origin debates from day one, or you're just trying to cut through all the noise out there, we're going to stick strictly to the facts presented on Capitol Hill. We're talking the testimony, the documents, and the agency responses. We are definitely not here to take sides. We're just here to explain exactly what's being alleged and how the accused agencies are responding to those claims.
All right, let's jump right in. Senator Rand Paul kicked things off with this pretty striking assertion, setting a highly dramatic tone for a session that was entirely dedicated to uncovering alleged government secrecy. The whole core of this hearing revolves around accusations that the public was intentionally misled by the very institutions tasked with finding the truth. It's a bold claim for sure, and the hearing aimed to back it up with testimony from an inside source.
To make sense of all these allegations, we're going to break this down into 4 parts: the whistleblower's claims, the alleged insider network, the declassification dispute, and finally, the agency's response.
Part 1. The whistleblower's claims.
So the star witness here is James Erdman III. This guy is a decorated CIA senior operations officer who literally led the COVID-19 origins investigation for the Director of National Intelligence. According to his explosive testimony, CIA scientific analysts repeatedly concluded between 2021 and 2023 that a lab leak was the most likely origin for the pandemic. But he alleges those findings were intentionally buried, softened, or just flat out withheld from official reports. He claims that intelligence community leaders favored the theory of natural origin, resulting in what he bluntly called a cover-up that ultimately failed to properly inform policymakers during a critical time.
And he wasn't just talking about a casual difference of scientific opinion here. Erdman testified under oath that managers actually forced middle-of-the-night anonymous rewrites to change analytic assessments. He even claimed the CIA retaliated against analysts who refused to abandon their lab leak conclusions. The heavy implication here is that the analytic tradecraft was completely compromised by management intervention.
Moving on to Part 2, the alleged insider network.
Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would an agency allegedly do this? Well, the hearing zeroed in on what they called a closed loop of influence, specifically looking at the BSEG. This is an advisory body designed to give the intelligence community access to outside scientific experts on biological threats. It sounds like a perfectly reasonable idea, right? But the hearing focused heavily on the allegation that these experts actually held massive conflicts of interest.
Senator Paul described this as a cyclical system. It's kind of like an echo chamber. Here's how he says it worked. Scientists receive government funding from agencies like the NIH. Then, the CIA consults those exact same scientists for classified intelligence on biothreats. The national academies then publish their work, and finally, policymakers cite those results as an independent consensus. The allegation is that it wasn't independent at all.
Right in the middle of this alleged web, Dr. Anthony Fauci. Erdman testified that Dr. Fauci leveraged his position to ensure the intelligence community consulted a heavily curated list of experts who already favored a natural origin theory. Erdman noted that some of these scientists had been in Fauci's orbit for over 20 years, and some were even involved in controversial gain-of-function research. The testimony suggested that the bureaucracy simply accepted these recommendations without even questioning the potential bias.
So, how did these alleged conflicts actually play out in reality? To put this into perspective, Senator Paul brought up one very specific and honestly massive number: $9 million. He claimed that one author of a highly influential paper that publicly dismissed the lab leak hypothesis allegedly changed his private opinion from supporting a lab leak to supporting a natural origin. And get this, shortly after this shift in public stance, that exact scientist's research team received a $9 million grant from Dr. Fauci's agency. The senators used this timeline to argue that financial incentives heavily outweighed objective analysis.
Okay, Part 3, the declassification dispute. So after breaking down that alleged network, Senator Josh Hawley completely shifted gears to a massive ongoing fight over government transparency. He reminded the room that back in March 2023, Congress unanimously passed a law, which President Biden signed, requiring the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to declassify absolutely any and all information related to potential links between the Wuhan lab and the origins of COVID-19. Unanimous laws are incredibly rare, making this a crystal clear congressional mandate for total transparency.
But here is where things get really bogged down. Senator Hawley pointed out a frustrating stall. The administration responded to this sweeping legal mandate with just a 5-page executive summary. Heavily redacted, by the way. Yet Erdman testified that this 5-page summary is definitely not all the information the government possesses. In fact, he stated that over 2,000 pages of documents are currently tied up in a highly bureaucratic interagency review process, with many more pages allegedly existing beyond that.
Then came what was probably the most jarring moment of the entire hearing. Senator Hawley asked Erdman about the actual substance of that 5-page public report. That report claimed that nothing researched at the Wuhan lab could plausibly be a progenitor to the virus. Under oath, Senator Hawley asked Erdman if those statements were true based on what he had seen in the classified intelligence. Erdman's response was blunt. No, they're not true. Hawley immediately characterized this as definitive proof of a government cover-up. Which brings us to Part 4, the agency's response.
Now look, this explainer wouldn't be doing its job if we didn't look at the other side of the aisle here. And it is incredibly vital to note that not a single Senate Democrat attended this committee hearing, immediately signaling a deep partisan divide regarding the validity of these proceedings. Furthermore, the CIA absolutely did not stay silent. They issue a fierce written rebuttal. Actually, scratch that. It's more than a rebuttal. It's a complete rejection of the hearing's premise. A spokesperson called it dishonest political theater. The agency argued that the committee acted in bad faith by subpoenaing Erdman for public testimony without even notifying the CIA beforehand, especially since Erdman had already provided his testimony to them behind closed doors. They are effectively framing this whole event as a manufactured spectacle rather than a genuine truth-seeking mission.
But here's the absolute crux of the CIA's defense, and honestly, it's a pretty fascinating counterargument. The agency forcefully stated that efforts to accuse them of a cover-up are entirely disingenuous for one very simple reason. The CIA has already publicly stated that a lab leak is the most likely origin of the pandemic. Their argument is essentially, hey, how can we be covering up a conclusion that we have already publicly acknowledged as the most likely scenario? It's a stark contradiction to the narrative presented by the senators and the whistleblower.
So what does this all actually mean for us? On one hand, you've got this highly decorated insider claiming deep bureaucratic interference, altered documents, and a curated narrative dictated by conflicted scientists. On the other, you have an intelligence agency pointing to its own public assessments and writing the whole thing off as a political stunt. As you weigh these explosive allegations against the stark denial of the intelligence community, it forces us to ask a much larger question. How do democracies effectively balance the necessity of national security secrets with the public's demand for absolute transparency, especially when millions of lives are disrupted by a global crisis? We'll leave you to consider what this profound dispute reveals about transparency and trust in modern government. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.